It's huge. They're not allowed to build up, because nothing is allowed to be higher than St. Peter's, which is the basilica, the cathedral of the Vatican. Now, you're going to learn there's a difference between a Duomo and a basilica. A Duomo is the cathedral of the city. It's the main cathedral, the crowning cathedral. And a basilica doesn't have a bishop that's in charge of it. A Duomo does. So, the Duomo is St. Peter's, even though technically it's in Vatican City, which isn't quite the same as Rome, but you don't know the difference. It's just a few blocks. And I lived 5 minutes from the Vatican. We used to go on a morning run, and we'd go through the Vatican by the Vatican. We were in running shorts, and you can't go in the Vatican with shorts. But we'd go right by the Vatican, right by the walls. And the thing that struck me is everything was old, and there were no skyscrapers in Rome. Because the cathedral, the spire of the cathedral, is supposed to be the tallest thing in Rome. And the Italian church wasn't united until 1870, or the Italian country wasn't united until 1870. And there was a huge, they called it the Papal States. There was this huge band of a couple of city-states. From the time of Rome, they were all just separate city-state factions, kind of speaking their own languages. Italian was just the language that Dante wrote, and everybody read Dante's Inferno, so everybody learned Florentino, and that's what became Italian. So if you go to Florence, that's where the most pure Italian is spoken, except for their slight, they say H's instead of C's. Other than that, it's pure Italian. But as Italy united, the Papal States were the last things to go, because the Italian government was afraid to attack it, or they'd get in trouble with Spain and France and any of the other Catholic countries. And so finally, all the other countries were involved in wars elsewhere, and so they just quickly invaded and took it while everybody else was busy. But they left them the Vatican. So the Vatican is what's left of the Papal States. When they did that, there was not a lot of kind feeling toward the Pope. They were Catholic, and as I'll tell you, my grandmother was Catholic, my grandfather was Catholic, I was born Catholic, I'm going to die Catholic. So they're very Catholic people. Whether or not they believe in the Pope, whether or not they're fighting a war against the Pope, they're still very Catholic. And he, of course, excommunicated Vittorio Emanuele, who's their George Washington, their first president. And there wasn't a lot of kind feeling toward the Pope. So they built this huge monument. The Pope was imprisoned over here, and the Vatican was over here, so he had to go this route to work. And they built this huge monument right there in the middle of it. And there had been a law for a long time, you can't build anything higher than St. Peter's. And so it goes up to within about 6 feet of St. Peter's. But then they put an angel statue on top of it with these wingtips that go 2 feet higher than St. Peter's, just to show it. Technically, the building isn't higher than St. Peter's, just the statue on the top. So they found this loophole to kind of stick it to him. And even now, a lot of people in Rome who are older people will tell you that they remember their grandparents talking about when the popes ruled Rome and how it was not a good time for anyone. They'd say, erano brutti tempi, they were ugly times. And it was, it's just an interesting fact about Rome. They don't build anything that high. It's 9 stories roughly, maybe 10. But there are no real skyscrapers. And it's ancient. I trained a greenie while I was in Rome itself. And we had a lot of contacts in what's called the Cradle of Rome, which is the area from Piazza del Popolo to the Roman Forum. It's the oldest area of Rome. And people are living in these apartment buildings that were built 1,000 years ago. They've just, put plumbing in and electricity in, and they've got vaulted ceilings in their apartment. I mean, a couple of them even had frescoes, these hundreds of years old frescoes just in their living room. And bare stone walls. It was really cool. But I remember I had my greenie with me, and I'd been in Rome at this point in the mission about a year. And so I was kind of used to some of the older things. Like, I never got used to Italy. I never got used to being in one of the biggest tourist destinations in the world. Every time I'd look up, I'd be like, whoa, look at that castle. Whoa, look at that ancient Roman theater, just all over the place. And they had so many castles, half of them were in ruins because they just didn't have enough money to keep them all up. So anyway, I had my greenie with me, and we went by the Colosseum. And then there's this place called Il Teatro di Marcello. And it's like the Colosseum, except it's in better repair, and it's made out of white stone instead of like this gray, dingy, sandy color. So it's really breathtaking. But I was really frustrated because then they built all this modern apartment building garbage on the top of it. And people live up there now. And so I was telling him about this as we were rounding the corner. I'm like, and it's really beautiful, or it would be, except that, gah. And we rounded the corner and he's like, where's the old stuff? Like, where's the new modern junk that they put on the top? And I'm like, well, it's right there on the top. And he's like, dude, that looks like it's at least 700 years old. And I was like, oh, you're right. But because the theater was built in 400 AD, it seems that the apartment on top, which was built in 1400, seems really ugly and new compared to the rest of it. You know, here's an interesting fact few people know, is that you go to Piazza Navona or almost any square or area that is oblong-shaped or circle-shaped, began as a Roman theater or a Roman chariot stadium. Piazza Navona is a very famous one. It's long and elliptical. And it's, if you've ever seen Ben-Hur, they do the chariot races in Circus Maximus. That's now just a park. The whole thing came tumbling down, and it's now just a park. But it's got this elliptical-shaped ditch, which is most of what's left. But Piazza Navona is a little bit bigger. And it used to be a theater, a chariot race theater. But as the Roman Empire fell, and everything fell into slums and ruin, and nobody could afford anything, they would build shacks on the bleachers, because you got your ceiling and you got your wall. And then those shacks turned into apartment buildings. Those apartment buildings turned into really nice apartment buildings and banks and things like that. But people just built buildings out of the theater and then replaced the old with new. So a lot of the circular and oblong-shaped squares or piazzas, which have like almost all of them have little fountains in them, are built out of ancient Roman theaters. Every once in a while you still find a couple of the old blocks where things used to be, and you can kind of see, oh yeah, that's where the theater used to be.